Welcome to day 4 of the 2022 challenge. I'm the Sociology guy. Today we're going to look at ethnicity and education as part of the 2022 challenge. For those of you who are new to this challenge, what I do is I set a question, or set 20 marks worth of questions on a topic area in the morning, and then by the evening time what I do is I put together a little video where I've answered the questions, and I also make those available to download from my website, thesociologyguy.com. We're going to go through this one quite quickly today. We're looking at ethnicity and education. The 3 questions I set this morning were outline and explain 2 ways that education can be seen to be ethnocentric. Now, I did send out some information via Twitter and via Instagram to show you sort of like ways in which the schools can be ethnocentric, or the education system can be ethnocentric. Things like school calendars and the organisation of the curriculum. Uniform requirements, school holidays, food that is served in canteens, the images that are put up around the school, the literature that is given out to parents, and how they all tend to reflect white middle class values, and as a consequence are seen as ethnocentric. Question 2, outline and explain 3 ways in which out of school factors impact on the achievement of different ethnic groups. A range of different responses you can have for this question. So some of the out of school factors that impact on the achievement of different ethnic groups. Negative factors, things like material factors, and racism in wider society, which stops people from achieving higher positions in work, which then of course links into material factors as well. Alienation and marginalization of different groups within society. These can be negative ways in which we look at out of school factors. Can also look at some positive factors, so the parental involvement. So for example, with Chinese students, Chinese parents sort of like are very involved in the education of their children in terms of seeing it as a family project. The authoritarian personality, sort of like of South Asian parents, matching that of the teachers. That's a research that was done, I think it was by Lupton, who talked about the Asian personality. Residual cultural capital of different groups. I think there was the work of Tariq Madood. You can also look at some of the ways in which the family structure is more cohesive within South Asian families, and how that has a positive impact as well. Third question, analyse 2 ways in which in-school factors influence ethnic differences in the experience of education. Because it is an item question, you've got to pull that material from the item. We spend a little bit of time talking about that later on, but some of the ways in which in-school factors influence ethnic differences are things like teacher expectations, teacher racism, peer interactions, the design of the curriculum, labelling, setting and streaming, lots of those reasons that we see, exclusions, disciplinary procedures, all of these different things. But let's go through the questions and let's go through my responses. So the first question was outline and explain 2 ways that education can be seen to be ethnocentric. The first way I've put, one way in which education can be seen to be ethnocentric is through the organisation of school calendars. Okay, so I get 1 mark for that, and then my second mark is for explaining how that is ethnocentric. Most school calendars are organised based upon Christian holidays, and so pupils from non-Christian religions will miss time in education to celebrate their own religious and cultural festivals. This has happened quite a few times in recent years, where Ramadan has fallen within the exam period, which obviously puts students who are Muslim sort of like a slight disadvantage because of observing Ramadan. Let's look at the second point. A second way in which education can be seen as ethnocentric is through the organisation of the curriculum. So, okay, we'll hint here at the ethnocentric curriculum. Subjects such as history are focused on events and people that are reared by the white middle class, and as a result do not reflect the wider diversity of ethnic groups in the education system. We can argue that the curriculum is very much based upon the ideas of the white middle class, because it's written by the ideas of the white middle class. We can counter this and say it is becoming a little bit more multicultural. Lots of people will suggest it is still incredibly ethnocentric, and there's lots of calls to decolonise the curriculum, which is something that you may have covered in your lessons. Question 2, outline and explain 3 ways in which out-of-school factors impact on the achievement of different social groups. So my first way, one way in which out-of-school factors impacts on the achievement of different ethnic groups is through parental cultural capital. Indian pupils, now just a note here, It's very important when you're looking at ethnic differences in education to talk about specific ethnic groups rather than using a very generic phrase like ethnic minority groups or using a phrase like BAME students. There's lots of diversity between ethnic groups. There are lots of different reasons why groups achieve and underachieve, and lots of them are linked into cultural differences, and there are major cultural differences between Indian culture and, so like, say for example, Black Caribbean culture. So to try and lump everybody together into one generic term, it's not really good sociology. So I focus specifically on Indian pupils for this one. Indian pupils achieve higher as their parents have higher amounts of residual cultural capital, which means they are more able to play the system and get their children into better performing schools. Let's look at my second response. A second way in which out of school factors impacts on the achievement of different ethnic groups is through parental involvement. Chinese pupils perform better than their peers in assessments as their parents invest more time into education, as children's education is seen as a family project and reflects upon the parents. Okay, so there's my 1+1. A final way in which out of school factors reflect on the achievement of different ethnic groups is through material factors. Pakistani, Bangladeshi and Black Caribbean families are overrepresented in measures of deprivation, and this impacts on their ability to afford additional resources such as private tuition and laptops, and it has a negative impact on their children in comparison to other ethnic groups. Okay, so what I've done here is I've done two kind of ways in which family background or home factors influence ethnic groups positively, and one in which it influences ethnic groups negatively. It's important to know that when we look at ethnic differences across education, not all ethnic groups achieve at the same rate. There are massive variances. We see white as being the average, usually because the largest percent of students are white, and that means they're closer to the average, but then some groups will achieve above average and some groups will achieve below average. And it's worthwhile, when you're writing maybe a bigger essay on this or maybe a 10 marker on this, is knowing that there are great differences between the different ethnic groups. Looking at question 3. Now we look at the hooks in the item. So let's look at the item and we'll pick out a couple of hooks that we might use here. There are broad trends in educational achievement across ethnic groups. Some sociologists suggest that the reason for these differences is due to the interactions that pupils have with their teachers and their peers. Others suggest that differences in achievement are down to the organisation of the education system itself. Okay, so there's a few things it's hinting at here that you could potentially use. I've highlighted the hooks that I would pick out. So teachers, which leads us into things like positive and negative stereotyping. It leads us into teacher expectations, leads us to teacher racism. Their peers, so we start to look at subcultural reactions there. Others suggest that differences in achievement are down to the organisation of the education system itself. So this leads us to conclude things like the ethnocentric curriculum and institutional racism within the education system. I've picked one reason that links into teachers and peers and one reason that links into the organisation of the education system, and I'm going to develop the points from those. So let's look at my response. One way in which in-school factors influence ethnic differences in the experience of education is through the organisation of the education system, item A. Again, always mention the item, always refer to it, signpost to the examiner that you're using the item. Sociologists such as Ball have suggested that the organisation of the curriculum is based upon Little Englandism, as subjects such as history and literature are focused on the accomplishments of the white upper class. Okay, so I've used a bit of research here, which kind of helps me to develop my analysis. This acts to alienate pupils from non-white ethnic groups as they do not see themselves represented in a positive light throughout the curriculum. Another bit of analysis here, because what I'm doing is I'm discussing the impacts of that. This can lead to pupils becoming demotivated or assuming that their cultural background is not worthy of academic study. I'm showing a deeper understanding, a little bit more analysis here. Evidence for the existence of an ethnocentric curriculum can be drawn from reforms to the history curriculum under then Education Secretary Michael Gove, who suggested that there was a need for pupils to learn the island story of British achievements. Okay, so we can use this to support it. The changes that were made to the curriculum around 2015, not only did they concentrate on learning 200 years of British history, Also, they removed books that were written by non-British authors. It did, though, and this is a counter-argument, it did introduce some authors, some British Asian authors and Black British authors into books that could be studied as well. So we could counter that slightly. But generally speaking, the 2015 reforms were seen as being reinforcing this idea of an ethnocentric curriculum. A second way in which in-school factors influence ethnic experiences of education is through interactions with teachers and peers. Item A, again, signposted. The development of different subcultures based upon ethnicity has been studied by various sociologists, with Archer studying Pakistani and Bangladeshi boys who adopted Afro-American subcultural identities in response to who they perceived as teacher racism, as what they perceived as teacher racism, that should be. Furthermore, Shane found that Asian girls adopted a range of different subcultural responses to teachers, with the development of gang girls who perceived education as racist, and rebels who adopted more Western values in opposition to gender inequality in their home communities. So we are linking the internal and the external a little bit there, but what we're doing is we're focusing on research that looks at the idea that in-school interactions with teachers and peers are influenced by a student's ethnic background. In both of these pieces of research, people turn to peers as a reaction to negative interactions with teachers, developing an alternative identity which was a result of their experience and education. So this is me linking back to the question. I've put a little bit of an evaluation here at the bottom. This can be further supported by Fuller's research that suggested Black African girls turn to peers for support as a response to teachers' racialized expectations. Okay, so it is all linked in together. There's 3 pieces of research in there. That's a lot of kind of in-depth knowledge and understanding of the issues. It's linked to experience, sort of like suggesting that this identity formation was part of the experience. This term experience can be measured through things like self-esteem, through achievement, through feeling involved in the school community. It can be measured through subcultural responses. It can also be measured through things like identity formation. So when you see that phrase experience rather than achievement, notice that you can talk about other aspects of an educational experience, really. So things like identity formation, labelling, gender identity, all sorts of different things like that. So that concludes sort of like day 4. This is a question for day 5. It's a bit of a mixed bag today. What I'm doing is I'm picking little bits from the different spec points that we haven't covered so far. So question 1, outline and explain 2 ways in which educational policies have attempted to reinforce social solidarity. A couple that spring to mind here, things like British values in the curriculum. Other ways in which educational policies, well, we've talked about one there with Michael Gove and the island story of Britain. This reinforces social solidarity. We can also talk about other policies like British citizenship and things like that, reinforces social solidarity. Outline and explain 3 ways in which governments have tried to tackle inequality in educational achievement. Okay, we're linking a little bit into the policy points, but it's not to say that the policy point can't be in the short answer questions. Tackling inequality. Now this is not applied to a specific group, so there's lots of different policies that you could look at there. EMA, Sure Start, Pupil Premium, lots of different things you could look at. And then our 10 marker, read the item and answer the question that follows. According to Functionalist, the purpose of education is to prepare pupils for their future roles in society. This can be achieved through the teaching of specific skills or through transmitting norms and values. And applying material from item A, analyse 2 ways in which education prepares people for their future roles in society. Bit of a shorter item here. You can look at this from a number of different angles. You could go with a functionalist angle and say, yes, school does prepare pupils for their future roles in society. This can be done through role allocation. Of course, that's one that's quite obvious in there. Teaching of specific skills, so obviously that goes back to Durkheim's ideas, and then you can even link that into things like vocational education or certain skills that you're taught within education to prepare you for work, which then potentially links into things like Bowles and Gintis, or through transmitting norms and values. This can be the ideas of transmitting a value consensus. It can also be from a Marxist viewpoint, where you look at sort of like hegemonic ideas. It can even be from a feminist viewpoint, patriarchal ideas, reinforcing the idea that girls should go into certain roles when they're older and boys should go into other roles. So there's lots of things that you could use in there. It's a very broad item. to look at. Well, that's day 4 done. Day 5's question is set. With day 5, normally sort of like we do this Monday to Friday, we're doing this one on a Friday evening for Saturday. So Saturday or Sunday, I'll post my video response and my written response to the questions. Next week, we are going to look at the theory and methods questions. So I'm going to try and do 5 methods questions, 5 questions about theory. And when I say theory, it's more likely to be in the debates, things like, are we living in a postmodern society, sociology and science, sociology and social policy, things like that, because we know that the advanced information is on consensus and conflict, structural and social action theories. And now if you do want to look at some 10 markers for those, there are some in the 40-day challenge that I did on my website 3 years ago that you could look at as well. Thanks for watching. Hopefully I'll see you next week.